What is going on, everybody? Welcome to, I guess, the first piece of content officially from First Round Fantasy, the fantasy football dedicated YouTube channel where we just show how much we love fantasy football, talking about news, stats, projections, our personal leagues, whatever the case may be. And this is something I thought would be fun leading up to the real start of the fantasy season. Look, us fantasy junkies, some of us might have already joined leagues that drafted and things like that. But for the casual fantasy player, they're not even thinking about drafting anytime soon. But what I think is very important is to understand the landscape of the fantasy year and what the possibilities of your drafts are looking like. So I thought it would be fun to draft and chat. So basically do a mock draft while talking about why I'm taking the picks that I'm taking and just giving potential advice out there. So basically what I'm doing it on Yahoo mock drafts. And when you click on a mock draft, they place you in a random spot. So I started a mock draft and they placed me at the number one pick. So I think this is a good way to see, because a lot of people want the number one pick, but then you got to think about how it affects your overall team. Of course you want Christian McCaffrey, but at the sacrifice of hurting the rest of your team, is it worth it? So I'm going to have the number one pick in this mock draft, and I'm going to go ahead and show my screen now. And basically, so I have the number one pick. The draft starts in 50 seconds or so, okay? So I am probably going to take McCaffrey. I mean, not the only other option. I mean, you can go with whatever you believe is best. But it's hard to deny that McCaffrey is the number one selection. Look, last year just had a monster year, and with the receiving and the running and how much that offense relies on him, he was a contender for MVP at the running back position, which is extremely rare. So you can't go wrong with this. Saquon Barkley is amazing, but that offense is a question mark. His health obviously affected him last year. You can't go wrong either way, but I think you gotta go McCaffrey with this first pick if you have the number one pick. Now, another thing I'm going to do with this draft is I'm going to do a bunch of these, and I'm going to go ahead and select McCaffrey because that's the advice I just gave you. But I am going to do a bunch of these, and I'm going to sort of do different scenarios, right? Number one pick, running back heavy, basically, or what I think they call it, zero wide receiver or something like that, which doesn't mean you're not taking any wide receivers, but you're basically going running back heavy to start the draft, and then at the sacrifice of losing your wide receiver depth. So for this draft specifically, I think for my first one, I'm going to do number one pick, best player available type thing. Then in the future, I'll do a running back heavy, wide receiver heavy, etc. So basically, if you have the number one pick, and this is a Yahoo League standard 10-team half-point PPR, so this is what we're basing it off of. So you got to go McCaffrey with that number one pick, in my opinion. Now, one thing I love, and every fantasy service that I've used has this. One thing I love about this is you can build a queue, because a lot of times, especially in the later rounds, not necessarily now, because right now we're drafting our top 3 or 4 dogs, but in the later rounds, you don't want to hit the clock and then you're searching for the guy you want. Like, who should I take? You want to know who you want, to know who you're going to take. So, like, you're not necessarily going to always take the best player ranked on here because this is just their rankings. But, I mean, they're pretty solid at top. But once you get to the middle, you might want a player that's 15 guys down because you have your eye on him. So one thing that is great to do, whether you're on Yahoo or anything else, like I'm looking around this area, right? So let's say I'm even Chris Godwin is still available, but I know I want George Kittle, right? For sure, if he's still available, I could put him in my queue up here. But that's not necessarily the case. I mean, even though I love Kittle, I am a Niners fan, but I'm just showing, for example, if I know I want Kittle over all of these guys, I'm going to put him in my queue. So when my turn comes around, I just boom. And as the number one pick, you have 2 back-to-backs coming back around in the second and third round. So you want to think about that as well. And while my pick approaches, I didn't even introduce myself. My name is Jacob Bartley. I am the creator of this First Round Fantasy YouTube channel. I am planning on doing a weekly podcast once the season really gets going. And by that, I mean at least very minimum the first couple weeks leading up to preseason. But maybe even sooner than that. And I do have a couple buddies who are going to be getting involved on this as well. So you will be hearing from them eventually on this podcast as well. But I wanted to start churning out some content as well. And among my group of friends, we are in a bunch of leagues together, at least 4 or 5 with different groups of friends that cross over and things like that. So we will talk a lot about our personal leagues on here. Just that's not going to be the primary focus of this YouTube channel, but we will be talking about those type of things. Like, for example, the first video I ever posted on here was the results for the draft order for my Dynasty League. So you might see that on there. And there'll be a playlist for called Our Leagues where we're posting content about our personal leagues. So where I'm at right now, based on the players available. Now, I'm doing best player available on this one. And for me, looking at Chris Godwin last year and what he did, and now he has Tom Brady coming in, and I can go McCaffrey, Godwin as my best running back and best wide receiver, that's not a bad deal coming out of it. So now I got to think, do I want to establish my running backs as legit and maybe go an Eckler here? Or if you feel high about Clyde Edwards-Helaire. But I think in this league, or in fantasy, running backs dominate, so I got to go Eckler. So I would feel pretty damn good coming out of this draft with McCaffrey, Godwin, and Eckler. That is solid. I got my number one wide receiver. I have the best running back in the league. I have a guy who has the potential and is almost like another Christian McCaffrey in a way. He's not, look, Austin Eckler's not as good as Christian McCaffrey, but if you look at the way he plays and how much of a receiver he is, he's almost like another Austin and possibly, or he's almost like another McCaffrey in a way. And it's possible that that he's even leaned on more heavily. Look, Melvin Gordon's gone. They have Justin Jackson and they drafted Kelly, but I think they're going to lean more on Eckler because Phillip Rivers is gone. Look, Phillip Rivers would chuck it down to Keenan Allen and Mike Williams all the time. And now that Phillip Rivers is gone, and you're either going to have Tyrod Taylor, or I believe they drafted a rookie running back, you're going to have one of those guys at the quarterback position. So they're probably going to lean on Eckler a lot, dishing off passes to him and things like that. So yeah, either way, like, I don't know what it is. I feel like there's more talented players in fantasy. I feel like there's more just stars and superstars in fantasy this year than there have been a lot in recent years. And it's like, look at Leonard Fournette and James Conner. These guys were going in the first round some of these previous years, and they could return to that form any given time. So it's going to be a really fun year in fantasy. I really like this start. It makes me think not to shy away from the number one pick, because I typically like to pick near the end of drafts, like 8, 9, or 10, because I like to get 2 of the top 11 players or 2 of the top 12 or 13 players. But man, if I get my team like this, and even if I didn't get Godwin and Eckler specifically, there's still that quality of players there, because if they get taken, 2 of the guys who got taken would still be available. So number one pick isn't looking so bad, and it's part of what I was saying. I consider Godwin and Eckler fantasy superstars. So if you say the first 20 players were fantasy superstars, and I would even extend it to maybe 25 players, number one pick's not looking so bad, because you're going to get McCaffrey and 2 superstars. So might make you rethink going number one. But yeah, so I'm basically doing this draft as if, okay, I just have the number one pick, and I'm going to draft the best team possible. I'll do other versions of this where I specifically go in planning to go running back heavy. So meaning typically you're going to take, if you're going 0 wide receiver or 0 running back. So if you're going 0 wide receiver, you're going to take 3 running backs in the first 3 rounds, or vice versa. You're going to go 3 wide receivers in the first 3 rounds. And that type of scenario could leave you with, Devontae Adams and DeAndre Hopkins, and then you get, like I said, maybe you end up with Leonard Fournette and James Conner as your running backs, which that's not so bad going in if one of those running backs hit. Or you can end up with a Singletary and a Le'Veon Bell, and maybe those guys work out. So either way, it's not too bad. Okay, so now I have my running backs established. I feel really good going another wide receiver here, because I'm gonna look. I have Godwin, but I need someone to be that next wide receiver, because you want the strongest starting lineup every week going in, and I really like Cortland Sutton. I think Cortland Sutton emerged as a superstar, and it's going to continue this year. And now, look, I have my 2 wide receivers and my 2 running backs, and your goal every week is to have the strongest starting lineup. So do I want to establish my flex, or do I want to lock in my tight end? And I was thinking about going Keenan Allen as my wide receiver. So I think I'm going to go Keenan Allen, or actually last minute change. Oh, it drafted Mark Ingram for me. Okay, another lesson to learn. So be careful when you're drafting in these time drafts. And that's okay to see, because that will happen. And look, that's why you want to be prepared. Maybe if I had Zach Ertz in my queue, that wouldn't have happened. So I noticed Zach Ertz was there. And like I said, you want to have the strongest starting lineup. So if you can get an elite tight end with your 5th pick, I think that's something worth doing. And Zach Ertz is still on par with Kittle and Kelsey and all them. And he was outscoring them a lot near the end of last year. So I really wanted Zach Ertz. But look, Mark Ingram is going to get a lot of touchdowns. I thought about Mark Ingram. Look, I was thinking about Mark Ingram. I was thinking about Keenan Allen. And then I saw Zach Ertz. But look, Mark Ingram is going to be a touchdown machine. The Ravens are arguably the best offense in the league. So that is not a bad pick right there. I just would have done it a little bit differently. So now, like I said, you never know if these are actually going to be your choices when it comes down to it, because maybe guys are thinking lower. Maybe guys want some of these guys, and so maybe somebody here is going to be available for you. But it's never a bad idea, like I said with Zach Ertz, to kind of plan ahead here. So as far as this goes, look, if I could get Darren Waller, if he drops to me, I'm taking that. He is a beast. He's just, I wouldn't put him necessarily on that Kittle, Ertz, Kelsey level yet, but he's right below it. So if I could come away, and look, Ertz is still available, but there's no way he's available with 10 picks. But possibly Darren Waller is. If I could come away with Darren Waller, that would be amazing. Also, I don't look. This is something that has changed a lot for me every year. It kind of changes for me every year is the value of the quarterback position. I used to think when I first started playing fantasy and I was naive, I didn't know what I was doing. I thought quarterback was the most important role, but obviously that's not the case necessarily. And then I really went like quarterback doesn't matter. You can, and a lot of fantasy experts say wait on quarterback, but I honestly think to a certain extent, quarterback. Oh, and Darren Waller's gone, of course. So looks like I'm gonna look elsewhere for tight end. But to a certain extent, quarterback is so important because I've been in. I played a lot of fantasy football, and I noticed the teams with the elite quarterbacks, with the Deshaun Watsons, with the Patrick Mahomes, with the Lamar Jacksons, with the Russell Wilsons, they dominate all year long. So I kind of I think QB is underrated to a certain extent. Like I think it is very important to have a strong quarterback and not just wait. It depends though. Once you get to that tier where they're kind of all on equal level playing fields, then you can wait. But so if you're not going to get a top 6 or 7 guy, then you can wait. But I think getting that top 6 or 7 guy is more important than people think at quarterback. Okay, so my tight end that I wanted is gone, but I could go Hunter Henry if I want. Man. Okay, I was just talking about about the quarterback position. Even though Hopkins left, I still think Deshaun Watson is a top 5 quarterback. And I was talking about if you can get one of those 6 or 7 guys, do it. And also, like I said, the most important thing is turning in the best starting lineup each week. Like I think inexperienced quarterbacks or not as skilled quarterbacks lean on their catching running back and their tight end a lot. So if I have them in LAC, who knows how that team's going to perform. I'm feeling good about that. I'm feeling really good about that. So now is where you want to kind of start thinking ahead and not necessarily waiting till the last minute to draft your guys. And look, I could put DeAndre Swift in my queue, but he's probably not going to be there. So let's look at some possible targets here. So I actually think Will Fuller is being slept on. If he can stay healthy, he's going to be Deshaun Watson's number 1 target. And we've seen what they can do together when they're both on. So I like Fuller as a potential flex spot here. He does have the same bye week of Mark Ingram, of course, but doesn't necessarily mean you can't. I do have a lot of week 8 bye weeks, but still, he might not even be there by the time we get there. Evan Ingram is another pretty good option at tight end. I actually think this is too low for him. I'll put him in that Darren Waller section, like the second tier of tight ends for sure. So let's see here. Let's say all of these guys get taken up to here, and let's say we're seriously at this point with everyone else taken. I really like Tyler Boyd. I think especially with Joe Burrow coming in, and look, AJ Green is one of the best receivers of all time, but who knows? AJ Green could be a fantasy superstar again, but he's not going to be there when I get my next turn, or else I would take him. Tyler Boyd is a great choice. Look, Marquise Brown is Jackson's number one target. So if you get him in on your bench or your flex, that's not a bad pickup right there. Austin Hooper could be a fantasy tight end, a good fantasy tight end here as well. But now that I have Hunter Henry, I don't necessarily. I can wait on maybe a flyer tight end with upside, but I usually don't draft two tight ends unless there's an obvious choice there. Gronk is a good option there as well. So one thing I do want to talk about, and I'm going to talk about every time I do this, is handcuffing. So handcuffing, if you don't know, obviously most fantasy players know what it is basically rostering your best players, backup players, so that way if something happens to one of your best players, you have their backup already. And it's mostly associated with the running backs. It's normally not associated with any other position, but it can be though. You definitely can have handcuffs for wide receivers, tight ends, and quarterbacks, but it's not necessarily what most people talk about when they talk about handcuffing. So, yeah, I would say keep an eye out for your handcuffs. Like, it just depends. Like, is McCaffrey's handcuff very talented? But like, you really want to keep an eye out for players who are injury prone, also players who their backup could be a starting running back, like Alexander Mattison on the Minnesota Vikings. If you draft Dalvin Cook, you better draft Alexander Mattison. If you don't, that is just not smart. And look, AJ Green is here as well, but I don't know. Like, wow, there's a lot of players here I did not expect to be here when this turn came around. And if you ask me, Deebo Samuel, and look, I'm a Niners fan, so I'm a little bit biased, but Deebo Samuel on my bench, who honestly I might even start him over Ingram some weeks. Just I can't turn that down. He was balling last year, so I'm gonna go with that. And look, I love rookie running backs. Like I think, how many years do we see rookie running backs emerge and then they turn into these superstars that nobody even thought. So for example, like Nick Chubb a couple years ago, right? I drafted Nick Chubb as a rookie in a keeper league, and then all of a suddenly, Carlos Hyde was traded, and now Nick Chubb is suddenly a fantasy superstar. So things like that. And look, Cam Akers, Todd Gurley's gone. We thought Henderson was going to be the dude, but we don't know. Look, Yahoo has Cam Akers ranked way above him, but this is what I'm talking about. Here's the thing with handcuffing. I know people who say, "Oh, I'm not wasting a spot on a backup player." That is exactly what you should be doing. Look, I said the goal is to get the best starting lineup every week. So you're not necessarily starting most of your bench players every week. You're not necessarily swapping them in for your starters unless it's a bye week. So for me, and you're not going to do this with every bench spot you have, but a couple handcuffs are smart because it's basically insurance for your players. And you're going to have your last 2 or 3 roster spots that are just going to be sitting there for flyers or random bench players or backup tight ends and defenses, which please don't draft backup kickers or defenses. You're going to most likely be streaming defenses every week anyway. Don't ever draft 2 kickers, and rarely draft 2 tight ends or 2 quarterbacks. You do not need 2 tight ends or 2 quarterbacks unless for tight end situation you can start. Look, tight end is the one out of kicker, defense, quarterback where you could draft 2 because you can start them in your flex. Like if somebody gets Kelsey and Kittle, like that's basically they're like dominant wide receivers that you can start at the tight end position. So yes, get them. But I'm not gonna draft. Like, I'm not even gonna draft Gronk after I took Henry. Like, it's just I'd rather get uh, backup running backs or things like that. So yeah. So my point being is, like, look, I draft Cam Akers. Like, we don't know what's gonna happen with that backfield. So if I can get Darrell Henderson, however it shakes out, if one of these guys emerge as the number one running back in LA or one of them gets hurt, either way, I have a starting running back. And I'll never lose that unless they both get injured, which is highly unlikely. So I just think that is very underlooked or very overlooked in fantasy, is the handcuffing thing. And I know, look, a lot of experts advise us to do it, but I still have friends and fantasy players out there who are anti-handcuff, and I just don't get it. I just don't get it. And the thing is, I tell them too. I tell some of my friends that they're ridiculous for not drafting handcuffs, and they don't listen. So look, I'm definitely gonna take Darrell Henderson because, like I said, among those two, I have a starting running back right there. Worst case scenario, they both are, like, Malcolm Brown takes a lot away, and they're both not usable. But I think out of those two, a starting running back will emerge. And like I said, the best receiver on the best offense in the league, Marquise Brown, like, you cannot go wrong with that. I'm surprised to see. I've done a couple drafts here now, and I'm surprised to see how low Marquise is falling, to be honest, in a lot of drafts. So I always kind of keep my eye out for potential handcuffs. Like, I'm not gonna. Who knows? I've said I'm not gonna get this guy, and they're still there. So who knows? But look, I keep an eye out for things like this. Like, if you can get, and I have back-to-back picks, so this is smart for me to plan for. But if I can get Keyshawn Vaughn and Ronald Jones, boom, I have Tampa Bay starting running back, however it shakes out. And look, there's multiple things to consider. Like, what if they're a committee? Well, whatever. You tried. You start the most high upside one. Maybe you start both during a bye weekend. Whatever running back scores, you get the benefit for it. So you don't want to have 8 handcuffs on your team, but for some of them, you do. And look, I'm gonna talk handcuffs a lot on this YouTube channel, so I won't. I'll stop talking about it as much right now, but it will come up a lot throughout, because I just think it's something to advocate for, especially when so many fans turn away from it. So Keyshawn Vaughn is gone now. Necessarily, I don't really want Ronald Jones now. I mean, if he's the best player available, sure, but I see more guys that I would rather draft here. So this is crazy because Kerryon Johnson was going high last year, and now with his injury and they drafted DeAndre Swift, he dropped a lot, which is crazy. Same with Marlon Mack and the dude that they drafted. So you always want to be looking ahead and scouting your next picks. And just like I said with rookie running backs, I have a thing with rookie wide receivers too. Like, the rookies are always fun to draft because you never know how they can turn into fantasy superstars, and you can always be like, you drafted them, and you're always going to get them for relatively cheap, unless they're like Edwards. Clyde-Helaire is ranked way too high because he could literally be the 4th running back on the bench. We don't know. So in my opinion, I think he's going way too high. But like a CeeDee Lamb, who's possible. Look, they got Gallup, and what's their best receivers' names? Amari Cooper and him. It's going to be a great offense there. And I really do like CeeDee Lamb. Not that I'm taking CeeDee Lamb with my next pick, but I just want to make sure I keep my eye on him. So again, we're just filling out our roster here. And look, now it's just kind of preference. Like, who do you want? And honestly, I like the upside of CeeDee Lamb, so I am going to take him here. And obviously, you can look at certain positions as well. Just okay. I like Philip Lindsay. I don't think Melvin Gordon being there means Philip Lindsay's going to disappear. I think they're going to be more like a dynamic duo. You still have Royce Freeman there, but I think Royce Freeman is hurt the most by Melvin Gordon being there. And I think Philip Lindsay is going to be the pass catching back. It's going to be a situation where you can use more than one guy in Denver. I really believe that. And look, Philip Lindsay was a high-end RB2 the past couple years. So I don't think that's just going to go away. Now, here's the thing. If I'm drafting the week before the season starts, I'm going to take my kicker and defense. But if you're actually drafting this early, there is no need to take a kicker or defense unless there's a situation where, and look, we don't know if the Patriots are going to repeat their fantasy year from last year. That's not necessarily the case. But if you believe that okay, take a defense now. But now is where you want to take players with potential. You want to take flyers. You want to take handcuffs. Because look, it's basically, so it's May 31st. It's June 1st. So we have a lot of time. We have preseason. Let's say hypothetically, I take Cam Akers and Henderson, and then Henderson gets hurt in preseason, and now Cam Akers' value skyrockets. So that's why, especially this early, you want to take handcuffs. You also utilize these two spots for handcuffs and flyers. If you're drafting this early, there's no reason to draft a kicker in defense. And look, like in Alexander Mattison, even though I don't have Dalvin Cook, I know if something happens to Dalvin Cook, Alexander Mattison is going to be an RB1 for sure. So it won't hurt to draft him for me right now. I can draft him, and let's say we make it through preseason and Dalvin Cook is all good to go. Either I drop Alexander Mattison, pick up my defensive kicker, or I try to trade Alexander Mattison to the Dalvin Cook owner to try to get some, if he values him or if she values him, handcuffs, then that's a good trade for me and for them. And let's see, who are my... So I have McCaffrey, Eckler, and Ingram as my running back. So you always want to look for the backup of your running backs. Or you take some flyers around here. So like I said, I really like Alexander. Oh, so I reached the maximum number of RVs I can draft. Okay. So I could still take a flyer on a wide receiver, which I will go Denver's rookie Jerry Jeudy on that. And this should be my last pick here. Let's see. I also like Justin Jefferson as well. So yeah, so this is my team. And look, normally I'm gonna draft a kicker defense, like especially leading up to the draft, but there's no need necessarily right now. Take some flyers if you're drafting this early. Take some handcuffs. Like if I hear one of these guys are balling in preseason, then I'm keeping one of them, you know. And let's say they announce Cam Akers is the starting running back, then possibly I can just drop Henderson and get my kicker in defense. So there's going to be a lot of different options for you. There's so much time leading up to the preseason and the regular season, so there's time to make those adjustments. And look, I don't think there's anything wrong with joining a league right now. Don't join 10 leagues right now, but joining one or two is fine because you can still scout. You can still scout players, pick players up. You can make trades. You can, build your team. And I know, I get it. Like, if McCaffrey gets hurt and I don't have his backup, that was so dumb that we drafted this early, right? But it's just fun. Look, there's always injuries in fantasy football, whether it's during the season or preseason, before preseason, whatever the case is. So it's fine to join a league early. They're not playing right now. They're most likely not going to get injured until preseason if they do get injured in preseason. So I think it's totally fine. And like I said, protect yourself with handcuffs. Maybe one of your guys gets hurt, so you get some waiver pickup later in the season, and they become an RB1. You never know what's going to happen, so it's totally okay to draft that early. But yes, that's going to do it for this first draft and chat. I hope that was fun. Look, I'm not an expert on fantasy. I just love it. So, and I've played a lot of it in the past 5 or 6 years or so. So I have a lot of experience. So I'm just having fun talking fantasy and giving some advice. So yeah, go ahead, subscribe if you want to see more of these. We're going to be doing a weekly podcast here pretty soon. So please subscribe and join, and let us know in the comment section what you thought of this. So what can we do to make these more fun and interactive? Would love to hear your thoughts again. I am Jacob Bartley. This is First Round Fantasy. See you all later.